when I was practicing, I would often tell my clients to go over the court report with your caseworker. They can't necessarily, some courts are different, but in some of the courts that I've been in, they can't hand you a copy of the court report, but they can talk to you about what's in it, because there's nothing worse than showing up in a room and hearing all new information and not being in a place where you're able to, quite frankly, defend yourself, where you're not able to explain, where you're not able to have the conversation about why this happened or how you see it differently. And so this is just a way for the parent to really have some control over the process. Today we are talking about power in your position. Power in your position. I was at a conference probably about a year ago, and I was speaking to primarily adoptive parents about skin deep and just the process. And so I have this graphic that I've created, and it's called the Child Welfare Continuum Challenge. And so in it, I have boxes of the different points within the system, and we spent some time really talking about what's involved in that box, who's involved in that box, and what's their power and position within that box. And as we were talking about their box, which typically foster parents, of course, they're going to be more so involved when there's court involvement, we began talking about their power. And they were really quiet in the beginning, but as we just continued to have the conversation, one of them said, "I didn't realize the power that we actually held until," and then she went on to tell the story of influence that she was able to have regarding a birth mother. Basically, the worker had kind of developed a bad taste in her mouth regarding the mother, and visits were slowing. Access to different resources was not as abundant and readily available for this mom, and it took the foster mom to begin advocating for this mom for change to actually happen. And it's something because there are many different players within the child welfare system, and they all see something different. And it's so important that when you are involved in the system, you understand what your power actually is. I know when I think about the court process, I think about caseworkers. And caseworkers can kind of go into the court process feeling a certain kind of way because the environment may be very foreign to them. But the truth is that the judge and the attorneys rely very heavily on that court report. And so the tone and the tenor and the cadence and how the information is being shared in that court report holds a lot of power. Well, when I was practicing and we would get the court report right before the hearing, that always, in my opinion, put my client in a negative light, because most people don't have time to go through the entire report right before court. So what do? You skip to the recommendations. You don't really look at the methodology, like how did we get here? What are some of the things that were said? And you just look at, okay, what do they want to do? Because you don't have time to delve in, and you don't have time to ask questions. You don't have time to follow up, because I'm just going to always say this, we're all human, and so mistakes happen. So there would be situations where the information in the court report wouldn't be entirely accurate. And it's not until I'm going through it with my client that I'm able to say, okay, tell me about this. Well, they're saying that you didn't, get services. Tell me what happened. Well, I tried, but they weren't accepting new clients, or they said that I wouldn't qualify, or I didn't have the money. There's many different things, or they could only accept me when I'm working. And so now I have to make a choice between keeping my job and going to get this assessment. There's many different nuances, and it's so important that when you're in court and when you're working with families, that you have an opportunity to talk about the nuances. It's not just, did you get it done or not? It's, no, I called and this service is no longer available. So I need some assistance in figuring out exactly where I need to go and how I need to do this. And so that's a powerful position that the caseworker can have within the process. The other piece, the court report, it's important, it's vital. It's the tone of the court report as well. It's how it's written. If you've read some court reports, you can tell whether this worker is in support of the parents or if this worker is not in support of the parent. And so even the tone in which it's written can have an influence. Not just the recommendations, but the tone. I've read court reports where they literally keep talking about why the kids got brought into the first place. Well, we're a year in. And so tell me about what the parent is doing now. Tell me about how the child is doing now. A year ago, yes, there were circumstances, there were situations, but a lot can change in a year, and a lot usually does change in a year. And so it's just important to stay focused on where are we now. Yes, we understand why we got brought in, but where are we now and where are we going? And are they going in the right direction? And so tone matters, when it happens matters. When I was practicing, I would often tell my clients to go over the court report with your caseworker. They can't necessarily, some courts are different, but in some of the courts that I've been in, they can't hand you a copy of the court report, but they can talk to you about what's in it, because there's nothing worse than showing up in a room and hearing all new information and not being in a place where you're able to, quite frankly, defend yourself, where you're not able to explain, where you're not able to have the conversation about why this happened or how you see it differently. And so this is just a way for the parent to really have some control over the process. When I was practicing, I would often tell my clients to go over the court report with your caseworker. They can't necessarily, some courts are different, but in some of the courts that I've been in, they can't hand you a copy of the court report, but they can talk to you about what's in it, because there's nothing worse than showing up in a room and hearing all new information and not being in a place where you're able to, quite frankly, defend yourself, where you're not able to explain, where you're not able to have the conversation about why this happened or how you see it differently. And so this is just a way for the parent to really have some control over the process. When I was practicing, I really did love CASAs because they provided continuity of care. Well, what does that mean? That means that at times different people within the case would change, specifically the caseworker. They necessarily didn't stay on the entire life of the case, but the court-appointed special advocate was able to offer that continuity of care. And the CASAs that I typically have worked with, they only will allow their workers to handle one case at a time. So they have one family that they're working with. Well, what does it do when you have one family? You can be laser focused. You can be very intentional. The other thing about CASAs is that they had to have consistent contact with the child. And so they were able to just provide that insight and that input that was helpful in the case for most cases. However, I have absolutely seen some situations where CASAs were overly involved, where they did not care for the parents, and where they were trying to actively have termination occur so that the foster parent or whatever person was in that position, typically a foster parent, could have the opportunity to adopt the child or the children. And so those are always very difficult positions to be in, as the parent's attorney, as a guardian ad litem, when you see someone who has a lot of power, and the power that they have is that they really don't have a dog in the fight. Their only job is for the child to be okay. Their only job is to advocate for what's going to be in the best interest of the child. And so they hold a lot of power, and they hold a lot of power and they hold a lot of influence because of their, quite frankly, good reputation and their past work and the good that they're able to do and that they have done in previous cases. And so CASAs, of course, aren't appointed for every family because there just simply isn't enough. But for the families that they are, they can be a major source of information. They can be a major source of advocacy for that family and what that family needs. And so CASAs hold a lot of power in the process as well. The last one that I'll mention would be placements. So whether it's a kinship placement, whether it's a foster care placement, whatever type of placement it is, I have absolutely heard people who are in a position that care for children when their parents aren't able to. They can say that they feel like glorified babysitters, that they don't feel like they're included in the process, that their voices typically are ignored, that they're looked at with suspicion, many different dynamics and factors. And I don't believe that that's in all the cases, but I know that that is true in some of the cases. This is also the other truth. When a child is with someone, even if it's for a short amount of time, that person that the child is with has some inside information into real time how that child is doing, how they're reacting, how they're coping, what are some of their struggles, what are some of their strengths, real time. And so although they don't necessarily have the historical information, they haven't known the child forever, they have information real time that can be helpful for the court to consider, that can be helpful for the therapist to consider. And so in Kansas, foster parents can write a report. They can write a court report. Foster parents can write a court report and they can provide that to the court so that the judge does have that additional information. But you can't just give it to the judge. So you have to give it to everyone that is a part of the case so that everyone has the same information. So it's not a secret, right? It's not a secret report. We're not making secret accusations. We're being very clear. We're being very concrete with the information, because that's the other thing. If you're going to provide information, make it credible information. Don't make it biased. Don't make it full of emotion. Don't make it full of thoughts that aren't relevant to what's happening. Make it concrete. Give examples on what are some of the concerns. And this is the thing, whenever you're giving information, it's so important that we're balanced in our information. Everything can't be bad, right? There has to be something that's working well, but too often when we do share information, we're wanting to share the worst of it. And so how can we make sure that we are looking for the good in the situations that are happening so that we can be that credible person that the court and the parties within the system are looking to for what's actually happening real time? That's the hard part of these situations of the case. I would oftentimes say that everyone believes that they're doing the best thing for the family and for the child in the system. We just have different positionings and how we get there. For people within the system and people that have power, it's so important that we lead with honesty, that we lead with clarity, and that we lead with emotional intelligence. There's nothing worse than having someone in power and they don't have those things, and people suffer because of it. And so as we think about our power, right, with great power comes great responsibility. How can we make sure that we're responsibly exercising our power, realizing that we do have power, that we do have control, and that it does impact people's lives, and at times forever. So I just talked about a few of the ways that power exists within the system. I really didn't even talk about all the different buckets and all the different boxes, but you may have thoughts on who has power and what does that look like and what does that show up as within the child welfare system. Would love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to link a document where you can fill out that information in the show notes. Thank you for going deep.